record. So we normally don't record these. So just a warning to everyone out there that this may end up on a podcast or on a YouTube, which we used to do back in the old days, and then we kind of got away. We kind of made these off the record meetings. So this may be on the record. We'll probably go a little quicker than normal. I'll probably start off, asking some questions. We'll go to Bill, and then we'll just open it up and hopefully be out of here around 2:45. But Greg, so I've already pre-recorded, in case this becomes a podcast, your introduction.
Thank you.
But for our purposes here, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm a Republican lawyer here in DC. I have spent probably somewhere between 10 and 15 years working in government and Republican politics. I started in the Bush administration in the Justice Department, working for the future Labor Secretary Alex Acosta. Then I went over to the Senate and I served 3 tours in the Senate, non-contiguously. First on the Judiciary Committee for Chairman Specter, later in Senate Republican leadership under Senator Thune, and most recently as general counsel to Senator Rubio. But I have been out of government now for a good 4 years. I spent the whole Trump administration in exile, so I'm happy to speak as a citizen.
Well, we're happy to have you here. I really appreciate it. Neither Bill, Sharon, nor I are attorneys, so it helps to have. We do have some lawyers who occasionally come on here as well, but just participating in these Zoom calls. But thank you. I guess the first question I have is the idea of incitement. We just heard that Trump's defense attorneys were citing Brandenburg, the standard. I guess 2 questions related to that. One is, does the prosecution have to meet a legal standard of the word incitement? And then part 2 of that question would be, when they drew up the impeachment articles, should they have made the bar lower? Should it have been like dereliction of duty or something other than, because the word incitement sounds like it has a legal definition.
Yeah, no, I agree with I think what your instincts are. I think it may have been a mistake to use incitement as the focus of the articles. It does cause some confusion. There was some confusion on this in the last impeachment trial. The phrase high crimes and misdemeanors, I think to modern ears suggests some chargeable crime. But if you're familiar with the founding and the writings around impeachment, the founders were very clear that impeachment and criminal prosecution are 2 separate things. They may overlap, but they serve different purposes. Criminal law is about punishment for crimes. Impeachment is about what one of the founders, I think, called a kind of a political punishment for a political crime. Hamilton talked about it's a remedy for kind of wrongs done to the community itself. So these are 2 different things. If one were guilty of criminal impeachment, one is probably also criminal incitement. One is probably also subject to impeachment, but it need not go the other way. I mean, you can fall far short of meeting a criminal standard and still have done impeachable conduct. I mean, we see that throughout the impeachments in our history. Lots of precedents of individuals being impeached for non-criminal actions, for words and just sort of public demeanor and conduct. The impeachment trial of Hastings, this famous trial that lasted many years, prosecuted by Edmund Burke, the intellectual founder of modern conservatism in the UK, was in everybody's mind, and he was cited regularly during the Constitutional Convention. And Hastings was both a former official, which is another issue in this matter, and what he was charged with was generally conduct that would not be classified as criminal. So,
Yeah.
so no, these things are not the same, and I think that should be clear. Unfortunately, I think the use of that language in the House article, the focus on incitement, caused some confusion. Republicans tending to start to excuse the president's behavior, saying it falls short of criminal incitement. But even the Democratic managers, I think, fall into the trap a bit. They were trying to prove what they didn't need to prove at various points in this trial, that the president acted with the requisite criminal intent to incite this riot, and that's not needed. They merely need to show that that he was reckless and in violation of his oath of office. You know, I hesitate to second guess the House strategy so much here because I clearly think they have the stronger hand and there's a power to their article of impeachment. But I probably would have done it differently. I would have likely had several articles. I know there's an elegance to one article, but most past impeachments have had a long list. And I think here, at minimum, you could divide up the president's conduct into kind of three buckets. One is everything before January 6th, which is
how about the call to the Georgia Attorney General? I think is impeachable.
That's impeachable. I think just publicly saying over and over again that the system was rigged and there's a massive conspiracy is impeachable. I mean, it bringing disrepute on the United States and turning its people against the legitimacy of our institutions. Language like that has been impeached before. What happened on that day, certainly, and then after the attack began, dereliction of duty in failing to respond. And I think it might have been wise to break those things down and make senators cast votes on each specific.
Yeah. Or give them an out, right? They could vote. You could get to say, I thought the incitement thing was too far, but I did vote to impeach on dereliction of duty, and you get a little cover.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, since you brought up Hastings and how he was impeached after he left office, the first day obviously focused on the constitutionality of whether a person who is no longer president can be impeached. Well, he was actually impeached in the House when he was president, but let's forget that part. But that was decided. So here's the question I have. If you were a senator, are you instructed should we view it as that having been decided, that you can no longer factor that into your equation when you vote to convict or acquit? Or could you say, look, I voted against impeachment, I voted against conviction because I don't think that was constitutional? Is that a legitimate thing to say?
It's certainly at least confused. I mean, if we analogize this to a criminal proceeding or court proceeding, which we really shouldn't, but were we to do so, yes, once these matters are these types of questions are resolved, then you move on and take the next stage on the merits. That's not really how impeachment trials work, and ultimately, senators are kind of judges and jury and can shape how they handle this and how they process those things. But it's at least a bit confusing. I mean, if most Republicans really believe the trial is unconstitutional, why are they still participating? I mean, are they violating their oaths by casting votes? It's a murky area.
Yeah.
But certainly the House managers would like senators to conclude that this matter has been resolved by the Senate, and it looks like most of them will not be doing that.
Just generally tell us what you thought of the House impeachment managers, their prosecution, and what you thought of the Trump defense.
So generally, I think you could judge the House impeachment managers case in sort of in two ways. Was it effective on its own terms to maybe kind of a neutral viewer, and was it well designed to win a conviction in the Senate with the jury that they were speaking to? I think in the first case, yes. I mean, it was riveting. It was powerful testimony. I thought that I had been shocked and appalled on January 6th, and it made it worse. I mean, it really laid bare kind of the raw horror of what happened that day. So it was powerful theater, a powerful case in that sense. Probably could have been better designed to win over Republican senators if that's what they wanted to do. I don't know if they even tried to recruit a Republican to be one of the House managers, but they sure should have. If they didn't, it would have been much more. Some of the arguments that they did make that were well crafted for a conservative audience would have sounded more plausible coming out of a conservative mouth.
I think last time Justin Amash wanted to be, and they wouldn't. They didn't want him. So
and now that there were 10 Republicans to choose from potentially, and even of the Democrats they chose, it might have been better to have some Democrats who were who
Yeah.
have more of a reputation for working across the aisle, who have relationships that are
I thought
personal and
like I
deeper
thought
with different
Swalwell was
Republicans.
really good,
Yep.
but he's also hated probably, for example, by most Republicans.
No,
So
I think that's right. And then the other, I think, really unfortunate tactic that they fell into sometimes was to explain how January 6th is the logical consequence of who Donald Trump is and has always been. And they talked about statements Donald Trump made over the course of the year leading up to the election. That's a tough argument to make in front of people who supported and voted for Donald Trump in November. It's making them a bit implicated in all this. Now, maybe they are. So again, this is you're thinking about it in two frames. Maybe to the American public, that is powerful, and that Republicans all have some culpability here. But if you're really trying to persuade Republican senators, I think that was a bit damaging
yeah.
to their case.
Uh, I could ask you a million questions. I'm going to ask you one more, then I'm going to throw it to Bill Scher, then we'll throw it open to everyone, and then I'll get you out of here. But let me just, since we're taping this, if you are listening and you want to be a part of these sorts of conversations, you can go to patreon.com/Matt Lewis, or if you're on the left, you can go to patreon.com/Bill Scher and support what we do and get in on these sort of chats. Last thing I want to ask you before I throw it to Bill is about sort of you grappling with this personally. I mean, I know that you worked for Marco Rubio, for example, and you and I'm guessing our political worldview are pretty similar. There are people like Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz who were part of the Federalist Society. People like Lindsey Graham, who I'm guessing you probably agree with on legal matters generally. What is it like? You had a tweet the other day where you basically said, the House managers are on the side of like the rule of law and the Republicans are not. What's it like for you, someone who worked, say, like for Marco Rubio, to be watching this play out, and like what happened to Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio?
For me, look, it's been a painful period of time for me, certainly. Just personally thinking about my own values and what drove me to serve in public life in the way I did, what drove me to be a Republican. Look, I share. I'm a pretty conservative guy. I share the policy agenda more or less of the Republican Party. But what always bound me to it, most importantly, was belief in the Constitution and applying the original understanding of the Constitution. I cared about structures and institutions more than about tax rates or something like this. And I thought some of those core values were more deeply held amongst elected Republicans than they've seemed to be in a few weeks, especially. So it's been tough. I don't know what Senate Republicans are thinking, and I don't want to speak for anyone in particular. I'm proud of the folks, the work I've done for the folks I worked with. I certainly, think we'd be in a better position had we nominated Marco Rubio rather than Donald Trump. But for one thing, in a matter of impeachment, it's tough for a politician to break with the president of their party. It doesn't happen a lot. I think Mitt Romney is still the only senator who's ever voted for conviction on an article of impeachment for a member of his own party. I mean, these things start out as partisan affairs. Politicians do have to answer to their voters, and Republican senators, most of their voters, and probably the most enthusiastic voters, are very strongly supportive of President Trump even today. And that's just an unfortunate reality. I think the party broadly made a series of mistakes over the last 4 years, but a big one was just allowing the party to be so defined by President Trump in ways that I don't think was necessary. I don't think Senate Republicans needed to go full Bob Corker or Jeff Flake to just show a little more independence and a little more defense of the brand, a little more distancing from the president. And unfortunately, that did not happen. And now we're seeing even in his post-presidency, he still maintains this strong influence over the party. And it's tough for me personally to see, but I try to be hopeful that a page will be turned eventually. It's being turned more slowly than I had once thought might be the case.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Let me bring in my comrade Bill Scher.
Bill is muted.
Come on, Bill. This
I
is
my
the.
my 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 kids are watching Drunk History, so I was muting. Um, that's why I'm sorry I was late. Thank you, Greg, for doing this. Greg and I have had some exchanges on Twitter, so it's nice to see you
Good to see
virtually
you.
here.
I am a DMZ super fan, so it's pretty cool to be here. And
Excellent.
I'm grateful for you guys scheduling this just smack in the middle of nap time. So it's both of my girls are down. So
Wow, how old?
1.5 and 3.5. So they're little.
Enjoy nap time while you
Yeah,
get it.
yeah. My nap time ended at 2.5. So, um, is it okay if I ask a non-impeachment question?
Go for it, Bill. The floor is yours.
So, Greg and I have had some back and forth about Trump's judicial legacy in the past. And when I've always been a contrarian voice saying, hey, this record is not as good as it's cracked up to be, Greg was always very sharp in saying, you can't just look at the overall numbers, look at the appellate level numbers. Trump was really crushing it on appellate level. What do you think now that Trump is a one-termer and Biden has at least 2 years of a 50-50 Senate without a judicial filibuster? Is he going to be able to eat into that appellate level number with judges moving into senior status now? Senior status is a quasi-retirement that opens up a vacancy. What do you think the Trump judicial imprint on the federal judiciary is going to end up looking like after this presidency, after the Biden presidency is over?
I think it's going to, at least on the appellate bench, fade pretty quickly. Assuming the Biden team prioritizes it the way the Trump team did. I know it was a frustration on the left that President Obama's administration didn't prioritize judges the way some conservatives have, but I think it seems that lesson has largely been taken by Democrats.
Obama caught up. Obama caught up. He started slow, but caught up.
That's true. But another criticism I think from the left on Obama was that his judicial selection process wasn't quite as ideological as they had hoped, and that he didn't prioritize youth as much as they had hoped. And I think both of those things are very much in the minds of Biden's team right now. So I expect they'll be diligent about this. And look, the end of the judicial filibuster is an enormous change, and that's a big asterisk next to all of Trump's numbers here. I mean, he was just dealing in a completely different world. When I was on the Judiciary Committee in the Bush administration running judicial nominations, we needed 60 votes. And that's just it's a very different selection process when you're trying to find someone who's ideologically to your liking that will not repel the other side.
And on the impeachment front, I know you said you can't really speak for the individual senators, but do you think what do you think is, generally speaking, the calculation here? We got perhaps 5 or 6 likely guilties based on their votes on the constitutionality of the proceedings. Could you get over that? Did you get a few more votes of conscience based on how the arguments went? And can you even get as far as bona fide conviction because of Mitch McConnell says, okay, guys, we need to disqualify this toxic element from our party and from a future elective office. Let's all lock arms and do this together. Is it long-term interest of the party? Is it short-term interest of their own seats? Or is it bona fide vote of conscience, irrespective of the politics?
I mean, I think that there will be a number of no votes for conviction from Republicans, and if that's the case, that alone is historic. And I think that part of the purpose, and this is maybe worth even stepping back from a second, because we have this whole debate about whether you can impeach a former president. People misunderstand, I think senators misunderstand, impeachment as being primarily about removing someone from office. I mean, impeachment is primarily about accountability for political wrongdoings and for assaults on our institutions and violations of oaths. Removal from office is a consequence, not the purpose, fundamentally, of impeachment. So I think that the trial and its drama and the record it's creating, along with more than one Republican vote, which will be historic, does some work for us, and it was worth having this process. I mean, I think it does some work in turning the page on Trump, but laying down a marker about what's acceptable for the future. It is far short of what I would hope for. I would think it would be not just healthier for the party, but healthier for the Constitution, for the institution of Congress and the Senate, if there was a conviction here. I have a lot of trouble even understanding the case for acquittal, no matter how many times I hear the president's lawyers talk about cancel culture or some other non sequitur. I don't see how the president complied with his oath of office. So no, it's very unlikely to me that we get to 2/3. I think it would require real leadership, which we've not seen, a coordinated effort from Senate Republican leaders to, as you say, hold hands on this one. It would help if Republican voters had turned a bit more after January 6th. I thought they would have. And I think, senators look at polls, and the polls did not move as much as I might have thought they would. So I think that your prognosis is probably where we are, not much more than the number who voted for the constitutionality of the proceedings.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and open it up to anyone. Jump in if you have a question, comment, criticism. Now's your chance.
I just have a brief comment, which is that it's striking to me, and I have not been watching the proceedings, much like Bill commented the other day. I've kind of moved past this, but I have been listening to people talk about them. And what I haven't heard much of is the argument that you heard a lot of previously, which was it would be anti-democratic to get rid of the president. It's basically overturning an election. That is clearly not true here. And yet it doesn't seem to be that much easier to vote to convict him, which I'm somewhat surprised by.
Yeah, I mean, I'm surprised too. I think there was, while I didn't share that view, there was some logic in the argument that we should let the American people weigh in on this. I thought the Senate might view this a little more freshly, a little differently without the president still in town and without priorities that they share with the administration, perhaps in jeopardy. So yeah, it's a bit surprising. What you do hear is a lot of talk of how this impeachment is an insult to the 75 million people who voted for the president, and this try to make it somehow cast in these partisan terms. But of course, I mean, you can't help but note that a year ago, the argument was that we can't impeach and remove the president because there's an election coming. And now the argument is that we can't do it because the election already happened.
I have a question. So what are the implications of an acquittal in terms of the strength of the republic? Does it mean that, when a president is on his way out after the election, he's just gonna, fuck things up and it's gonna just, it's like the last 2 months of a president's term are going to be incredibly chaotic, and they'll do whatever they want essentially on the way out, even committing a crime?
I worry about the precedents that are being set. Like, I mean, I think impeachment as a tool has not been used enough. I mean, it completely fails to move me when I hear Republicans warning and Trump's lawyers warning that this is going to be too easy to impeach future presidents. I mean, impeachment is a core tool of Congress to keep the president in line. And that's why it was so important to the founders. It's why they spent so much time talking about it. Hamilton calls impeachment the bridle that Congress will hold on the executive. And I think we've not used impeachment enough. Impeachment sets up these trials for abusing office. And I think presidents and cabinet secretaries should be called to account far more frequently. I'm worried about this president, and it's not just this president. Now we have multiple impeachments where we see that members of the president's party are more or less loyal to the president and see a vote on conviction about partisanship and loyalty to their party. And if that's really the case, then you never get to 2/3 and you never get to convict, whether it's late in the term or earlier. So I worry about it.
I would say as well that more frequent impeachments are a good counterweight to the unitary executive theory. If you're going to invest the executive with this much power in a variety of places, you want to be able to remove him when he abuses it.
I wanted to ask Matt, I was wondering if you thought that Republicans want him to run again, because isn't there a political motivation for them to prevent him from running again by convicting him, so that they don't have to deal with him again and they can cleanse the party of this?
Oh yeah. By the way, it looks colder there. Normally, it looks like it's very warm where you are, like in California. But is it cold there today?
It's windy.
Is it windy? Okay.
I had to
let me answer
because
this
it's
one.
so noisy inside.
No problem. I'll answer this one, and then I'll throw it. Then I'll throw it to Greg. So I think that look, if you were Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz, it would be smart for you to want to get rid of the 2024 competition. But for the rest of them, like, this is okay. I'm reading this quote from Alex Bolton, a staff writer from The Hill, and he writes, Republican senators agree with Lisa Murkowski that the damaging case laid out in detail against Trump this week makes him unelectable to the White House in 2024, and think it will help eventually distance the party from former POTUS. Now, in my mind, that is insanity. Have these people not been paying attention for the last 5 years? But I think in their heads, they think, well, what are the odds he could run again? What are the odds, after all this, what are the odds he could win again?
He's learned his lesson.
They never learned the lesson. Remember, wasn't it Susan Collins who said, after the first impeachment, I think Trump has probably learned his lesson? They have this, I don't know if it's a normalcy bias or what. Greg, what do you think?
Yeah, it's a lot of wishful thinking. I mean, I think as politicians, they're in the horns of a dilemma. I mean, they have the Trump base is a big part of the Republican Party, the most energetic part of the Republican Party. It's not enough to win a national governing majority, but you sure can't do it without those folks. So I think since the beginning, a lot of political actors on the right have been trying to calibrate around Trump and trying to not offend him or his fans, and hoping things will work themselves out. And I think Matt's right in the sense that there have been lots of opportunities to learn that lesson, and we still haven't.
Hey, I have absolutely no sympathy for the National Republican Party. As a Democrat, kind of a loose Democrat, actually, a lot of the Democrats I know have never underestimated the Republicans. We're not surprised. Out of here in California, my friends and relatives who are Republicans have generally left the party and registered as independents and are appalled. And to me, it's just this, like you say, this dilemma between the certain segment of the rank and file and the establishment people. And when are they going to not be calculating weaklings and stand up? Look at what Nikki Haley did today. It's just appalling. I've given up. I like a loyal, principled opposition. I support conservative fiscal policies on occasion. And it's appalling.
What's disappointed me over the last 4 years, I try to be clear-eyed about politics and its limits, and politicians and their limits. But it does disappoint me that, say, senators who aren't running for re-election or have just been elected and have 6 years haven't used that opportunity to create a little more distance. And if some of those guys did, they would create more room for the other guys and gals to come along. And there's been a strange reluctance to do that. I mean, especially now when, again, we don't have the administration in office. There's not the excuse that I want to work with Trump to get this priority done, so I don't want to make him mad. The Federalist Papers, they talk about the Senate impeachment trial, and Hamilton writes about where else could you find a body so secure in its own situation to not act as partisans. And it is 6-year terms are long, and I can't imagine a member who is just reelected worrying that much about this vote 6 years away. But
are they worried about extortion? I mean, the story from the previous impeachment that Adam Schiff relayed on the Senate floor, where he said, there was a phone call where Donald Trump warned them that their heads would end up on a pike if they voted to convict him. And I'm wondering if they're just afraid of him and they're afraid of his exacting revenge, as he so likes to do.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I really can't. I don't know. I think there's a political fear of his voters. I think there's also some exhaustion among Senate Republicans for having had to defend Trump for so long, and I think they're kind of mad that they have to do it again, and they sincerely want.
I'm sorry, Ann, I'm on a call.
There could be some. I mean, there could be some physical fear too. You know, based on what we saw on January 6th. So.
Sure. I mean, yeah. That was a real thing, and yeah. members who've criticized the president get threats, to their home and office, and there's certainly a climate, I think, in this country right now that has people legitimately worried about more political violence.
Greg, let me ask you a legal question. If you were representing Donald Trump, is there a good defense? Was there a way that these attorneys could have actually done a good job, or was they just were dealt a horrible hand to begin with?
Yeah, I mean, the presentation clearly hasn't been good, and there have been moments that have been really rambling and perhaps counterproductive, but I do feel somewhat bad for them. I mean, I don't think they had a good case. And remember, these folks just took the case a handful of days ago, so they had neither the time to prepare nor much material to work with. So I feel, as an attorney, I feel somewhat sympathetic for the president's lawyers, because they were in a tough spot.
Had you ever? I mean, you're in legal circles, obviously. Had you ever heard of any of these attorneys?
Well, I know only Castor, because I'm a former Philadelphian, and Bruce Castor was a district attorney in a previously Republican suburb of County of Philadelphia, and was kind of for a time seen as a rising Republican star in the state. That's a good 10 years ago now, but so I knew him a bit, not the others, I should say.
All right, we got 8 more minutes.
I mean, and they're certainly not the kind of lawyers that you would think would be defending a president.
Right.
There's a small community of conservative legal luminaries here in town that the senators know well. I mean, you would think that you would choose from that group, and presumably none of those folks wanted to take the case, and there's good reason for that.
I consider his acquittal to be, a virtual certainty. So moving beyond that, do you think in the next year or so that there is some legal case like the Georgia case, or DC could accuse him of inciting a riot, or in New York City, these cases? Is there any one case where he would be in such a position of legal jeopardy that he might be found guilty and face the possibility of prison time, or at least probation or something like that? I don't think you'll ever go to prison, but what's his legal jeopardy in the next, for any of these various potential cases?
Yeah, I don't know enough about the facts on any of these, but certainly there's ambitious prosecutors all around the country looking into President Trump's actions both in office and before office. My guess would be he might be more anxious about matters relating to his business and financial interests before becoming president than the type of things that are before Congress right now. But again, to me, I think this is criminal liability is such a different thing from impeachment, and I find it unfortunate that the two get blurred so much. I mean, you even hear Republican senators kind of using this as an excuse to not convict. That, the courts are going to look at this. We need a DA to really take this on. I mean, it's just another kind of episode in the weakening of Congress and Congress's increasing willingness to put its responsibilities off on the other branches of government. And it's something, as a former congressional staffer, really disappoints me.
I heard Daily Beast writer Molly Jong-Fast said the other day that if they can't stand up against, violence against themselves in their own workplace, then what will they stand up against? And I think that's a pretty good explanation for how they themselves are on trial, for all the world to see.
I've heard the argument trotted out that how can the senators sit as a jury when they're the victims? Therefore, the impeachment is moot.
Yeah,
And
let's talk about
instigators,
It's the real victims here.
Greg, let's talk about the jury, the concept that they're jurors, right? Apparently, I think it was Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz, and Lindsey Graham met with the defense. That would not happen if they were jurors.
Right. I mean, they're certainly not really jurors in any traditional sense. They make the procedural rulings as well. They function kind of like judges, kind of like jurors. They do, however, swear an oath of impartiality in judging the case. There's a reason for senators to be reflective about doing things that suggest they're impartial, that they're partial. But the reality of it is, impeachment is going to be a political process, and it's not new that senators are victims in a sense, in that obviously here they're victims. They were victims in a physically threatening sense, but lots of impeachment proceedings are about defending the Senate from encroachment from the other branches and pushing back in cases where a president is perceived to have usurped authority. So that's not new. One of the earlier impeachment efforts was about what the Congress thought was a president overusing the veto power, and there was a dispute at the time that the veto power was only supposed to be used for constitutional reasons and not for policy disagreements. And members of Congress thought their authority was being encroached upon by a president vetoing for policy reasons, saying that was that's their role to make policy judgments, not the president's. So impeachment is designed to protect Congress. I guess what's new here is it's protecting them in a very, very, very visceral and physical way.
All right. Anybody else?
Well, I'll chime in. This question for Greg. He sort of touched on this. What's amazed me is how much these senators and House members desperately, the worst thing in the world seems to be not getting reelected. And of course, we know politicians want to get reelected. That's why they do it. But three thoughts. First, anytime you run for office, there's a chance it won't last forever. Second, you think there'd be some limit when their physical safety is placed in jeopardy, that they would say, I'll do a lot to get reelected, but there's certain things I won't do, which is sort of what Pence did, I guess. And although his reelection wasn't at issue. And then third, even if they don't they lie to themselves and say, I'm really here for the greater good? And watching this Senate trial, is there any senator who doesn't have to admit to himself, I'm just doing this because I want to enhance my chance of staying in office? Is there anyone who could lie to themselves and say they're doing it for principled reasons? I guess they do. There's a lot there. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm sure that many senators, perhaps most of them, believe that they're doing what is right in principle. I think that they're presented with some arguments that sound plausible on the surface, like we have something to fear with impeaching former presidents, or that it's important that we turn the page and unify the country and cool down. And I think it's a human thing to gravitate towards arguments that are easy for you to embrace, or easier for you to embrace. But I'm sure there are degrees of earnestness amongst the members. I do think that the politicians I admire most are the ones who are willing to take risks about their reelection. I was not, until a few weeks ago, any particular Liz Cheney fan, but that was a genuine leadership moment for Congresswoman Cheney. It was real risk to her political future to not just vote to impeach, but to put out a searing statement like that. That was the first thing quoted by the House prosecutors in the Senate was Congresswoman Cheney. So I admire her. I admire the other Republicans who voted with her, several of whom put their reelections in jeopardy. It's not enough, but it's something. And given kind of the partisan forces in our country today, I try to focus on that and see shoots of hope that there are folks
If you
Folks are
had,
still so moved.
if you had to bet, how do you think McConnell votes?
I don't know anymore. I mean, I 2 weeks ago, I thought he was a vote for conviction, and I feel a little less sure today. I was surprised, genuinely surprised, that he voted in favor of the constitutional point of order brought up by Rand Paul. I did not think he was going to do that. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, he certainly obviously regards himself as an institutionalist, regards himself as someone who plays the long game and thinks about the long-term prospects of the party. To me, both of those things point towards voting to convict. But it certainly does seem that he's backed off a bit from some of his earlier signaling on this, and I can't explain why that is. So that was a long way of saying I guess I at this point I might be a little surprised if he voted to convict, but I would be pleased to see it.
Well, Gregg, I appreciate you taking time to talk with us in the middle of the trial. How can people who want to keep in touch with you or read you or follow you on Twitter, how could they do that?
Yeah, you just look at my Twitter handle. It's just my full name, Gregg with 2 G's at the end, Nunziata. My last name is tricky enough to spell, so my mother further complicated it by giving me an unconventional spelling of my single-syllable first name. But Gregg Nunziata at Twitter.
Well, I appreciate you being here, and thank you everyone who tuned in. It's a weird. Normally we do this for at least an hour, and it's very casual. But like I said, there's the trial happening right now. And we probably should watch it. But thank you, Gregg, and thanks everyone for joining us today, and we'll see you all next week.
Really fun. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gregg.
Thank you very much.
Bye, thanks.
Bye-bye.